My IT teacher was really hot. All the dudes had a crush on her. Nothing happened. I left school and she added me on Facebook. We'd spoken a lot about mental health stuff because I'm autistic and she had an autistic brother. A lot of time to just aimlessly chat in an early 2000s IT class waiting for shit to load. Anyway, a few years later I was in a homeless shelter. There was this total nutbag there who kept getting the shit kicked out of him because he was delusional and would accuse people of shit constantly. He ended up getting kicked out. I went to buy some weed from the dealer all the shelter residents used the same day. He was there, loudly shouting "You don't fuck with a teacher's surname," and thought to myself, LMAO, I wonder. So I asked him if he had a sister named teacher's first name. Got no response from him, just a weird stare. So I pulled out my phone, brought up Facebook and showed him a photo. Is this your sister? How do you have photos of my sister on your phone and just flip the fuck out at me? Tried to take a swing, I just moved out of the way and he got dragged off by some other customers. Told his sister the story via Facebook, and her first response was, "What are you doing in a shelter?" She ended up giving me a job for a while to get me on my feet. Grade 10 biology teacher. She was really young, must have been fresh out of teacher's college, really bubbly and cheerful, willing to help students, really seemed to care about her work, which was not the norm at my high school. I don't remember her name. I mean, it's been over 25 years and biology was one of the subjects I didn't pursue to completion. Never did anything about it. Dear reader, if you were a petite biology teacher in Scarborough, Ontario in the 90s, and remember boasting about having a playset of Beta Sarah angels to a tall ogreish socially maladjusted student, hit me up. I'd love to buy you a drink and catch up, even if it's just platonic. I thought you were so cool. Yes. Our computer class teacher. Everyone had a crush on him, but we all thought there was no way he would ever pay attention to us being so young. He was really kind and always so smooth. One day the principal found him after school hours making out with one of the senior students at the teacher's lounge, and he was fired right on the spot, while the girl was suspended, but they kept it a secret from the rest of the students. The next day they hired some guy who looked like George Constanza to replace him and told us that the previous teacher had to take a trip or something. We found out about what happened from rumors, and I knew for sure that he didn't go on a trip because he worked part-time at my then-boyfriend's school and he said he was still working there. One day a news reporter was outside my school trying to interview parents about what happened. Turns out the girl the teacher was making out with was the daughter of some important business's man and he wanted to sue the school. The school then had to tell us the truth about what happened, in a very meek way, and asked us not to talk to any media about it. It was a big scandal. I was just crushed knowing I actually could have had a chance with him, haha silly me. Girl in my class had a flirtatious relationship with our social science teacher in high school. Immediately after graduation she went up to him and said, "I want you," and he said, "I always told you guys to go after what you want, didn't I?" At least that's what she said happened. But they got married and had 2 kids. Divorced a few years later, but hey, she shot her shot. It was scandalous in our little town, of course. He was like 28, I think. She was my 11th grade English teacher and she was smoking hot. All the guys had a crush on her, but for some reason, possibly because I was an avid reader, she took a shine to me. Nothing inappropriate ever happened. She moved across the country the next year when her husband's office relocated, but we kept up a very platonic student/teacher correspondence for a while. My friends were freaking out that I, at 16, had somehow found the magic formula to get an 11 out of 10 woman to be interested in me. To my young horny male credit, I never exaggerated the relationship to be more than it was and never bragged about it other than I had a friend every other guy wished they had. There were 3 hot teachers at my school. I was in the 3rd hottest teachers class one semester. Asked her if teachers were allowed to go to prom with students. She replied, Mrs. D and Mrs. C already have dates, I believe. If that's why you're asking, I said no. I was actually wondering if you would go with me. She turned the brightest shade of red I have ever seen on someone's face. The whole class was girls, media studies class, and they were gasping and giggling galore. She politely declined and we continued on with that day's lesson. Nothing ever came of it, but I got a decent bump in my grades in her class after that day. She passed away a decade later after a battle with cancer, R.I.P. Miss S. Not myself, but had a friend in junior high that confessed their attraction to their teacher. The teacher thankfully did the right thing and let them down, but then he had to transfer to another school because he felt it was not appropriate or comfortable for him to be in the school anymore after that. I've always felt bad that he had to go and change up his life just because some teenager couldn't keep their fantasies separate from reality. Had a huge crush on a mid-30s to early 40s teacher who got very creepy after I graduated. It was really too bad because he got me into psychology and I'm a psychologist now. We met midday for what I thought was a platonic beer to catch up at a popular non-sexy Irish pub/restaurant. He was married, so I naively thought he didn't have any intentions. He flirted and tried to get me to leave with him to see his new house. I said I had plans and left really sad and disappointed that I had lost a mentor. It had been a fun fantasy, but when he actually went there I was disgusted, largely because he was married with kids. He later messaged me on Facebook telling me he had a dream we ran away together. I blocked him and never talked to him again. I went to a boys-only boarding school, so every half-decent female teacher ended up as someone's crush. We had a science teacher who wouldn't be pretty anywhere else, but we were 14 and no other females in sight. The teacher's desk in her lab was on a stage, so slightly elevated, and it was one of those where there was a gap where her chair was. So everyone could see her legs when she was sitting. She had this habit of opening her legs, whilst wearing a skirt, and you could see her underwear, but only if you sat near the front. Or dropped a pencil. She was married to one of our other teachers, but she was always so flirty. I think she ended up sleeping with one of the sixth formers. And it became a scandal. That was my first view of women's underwear. And I'm sure she played a starring role in many dreams. I had this young, hot, fresh out of uni teacher for year 10 geography. She did not like me at all. One day, we were working on a group assignment and I was sitting on the back row of tables facing my group partner and talking to him. She was sitting on the back row against the wall facing me and helping another group. She called out my name and told me off for not staying focused and then went back to talking. Because of this ordeal I was facing her. As soon as she went back to talking, she did the old Sharon Stone from Basic Instinct and uncrossed and recrossed her legs while wearing a miniskirt, and my eyes just stopped working from a split second. Literally, my vision just went entirely blank for the small fraction of time and I didn't get to see anything. I had the perfect view and my eyes decided to stop working for the first time in my life. I've never felt so betrayed in my life. I had a small crush on my middle school teacher. When I moved to a totally different city to attend high school, age around 16 to 17, I came back to my hometown and absolutely accidentally bumped into him on the street. The chit-chat quickly turned into a day-long walk, night-long talks, butterflies in the stomach, and eventually sex. A lot of awesome sex. I was head over heels in love. Everything was great, except for the fact it was completely toxic. We had 12 years age gap. I visited his town only during summer. I was a teenager in love, and after a year of this weird relationship he broke it off just to completely vanish from my life. A year later I find out he was married. We do have contact now, but I don't think I've fully ever recovered from it. It fucking sucks that to this day I miss him. I had 3 high school teacher crushes. The first was a gorgeous Hawaiian woman who taught geometry. She had the most beautiful long hair. She only worked at my school for 1 year, so I never saw her after that year. The next was my programming teacher. She was blonde with a pixie cut and was full of bubbly energy and an incredible body. My crush and the crush of pretty much every boy in class ended when her husband visited, and the dude was Henry Cavill levels of handsome. We all knew we couldn't compete with that. The last one was my SAT prep teacher. She had graying hair, smile lines, and petite as hell. Her personality and strength of will was so powerful she came off as an unstoppable giant. I love a strong woman and she turned me to jelly on the inside. That was my last year of high school, so that was the last time I saw her. He was recently divorced because his wife cheated, he had kids, and we were close because of my home situation. I wanted to comfort him about his divorce, but he was a sensible grown man who didn't allow me to because I was like in 9th grade. It would be inappropriate. I'm older now though, If I found someone like him, I'd never need to date again. He was really funny and awkward. He stood up for me when my social anxiety took over during group assignments. He kept my grades up by actually checking on me. He was basically the best, and I really miss him. I don't think it's appropriate for me to still feel this way about him, though. In high school, there was this chemistry teacher who was absurdly hot, like supermodel level attractive. We kinda turned it into a joke that everyone was attracted to her, including the gals. And how we chose her class over honors chemistry even though we qualified for honors chem. But the twist is that she was a genuinely great teacher, whereas the honors chem teacher was a tenured old dude who just put up video lectures. She knew it too, since she always wore unflattering clothes to try to downplay her attractiveness. It did not work. Also, she showed us her wedding pics cause she got married halfway through the year, and no joke, her husband was so hot too. He looked like a combination of Chris Pine and John Cena. Our math teacher in 7th grade was hot AF. All girls had a crush on him, and some female teachers, especially one French teacher. Then one day me and some friends saw him in the city, holding hands with another man. He was mortified when he saw us, Rouen, small city in the early 2000s, so I guess he was afraid of the scandal. Of course we told it everybody the next day. I now know how shitty that was. Nothing happened. He still teaches at the same school but is way more comfy with himself and his partner. Saw him last year at a reunion, smiley face. He doesn't remember what happened, or at least he said he doesn't remember it. After I changed school, I had a hot geography teacher. In my last year, I was 18, we flirted a bit on a school trip. Nothing happened, but I studied geography because of him, lol. I had so many. But I'll answer for my favorite one. Okay, so he was my tennis coach and taught at my high school. I was a junior. And I had started writing him like letters and notes. Nothing sexual, mostly just telling him what I think about things, because I was shy. I was always going to his class to ask questions, like every day. It was during COVID, so my school was kind of vacant, because most people did online school. I chose face-to-face to see him, obviously. I didn't have any actual classes with him. Eventually, he caught on to my crush and set boundaries. He started distancing himself, and I got more aggressive with my flirting. Like, I asked him if he wanted a kiss. I had a Hershey's Kiss in my pocket I was talking about. And I would always talk to him after every practice. What ended up happening was he decided to quit his job. He told everyone like 3 weeks before school ended. So when I found out, I naturally wrote him a goodbye letter. At the end, I put something very cringy about 50 Shades of Grey. I didn't sign my name or anything. I know better than that. He ended up emailing a guidance counselor, and they had a talk with me and told me to leave him alone. I didn't get in trouble since it was like the last week of school. And no one found out, so I guess I got off scot-free. Librarian. She was 29. Dressed like a librarian and wore button-up blouses with fringe at the collar. Telling people to shush. I didn't necessarily have a crush on her, but had a good relationship where I would joke around when I came in the library, and she enjoyed the banter. Ended up going on senior trip to Boston. Graduate in like 1 week. Entire bus is eating at Faneuil Market, which has a huge food court. I get chocolate cake for dessert and see the librarian, who is a chaperone. I sit with her and she asks for a bite. I gave her my fork and got another, and we enjoyed the cake. Turns out she is divorced and very lonely. I could smell blood in the water and decided to hit on her, and she was receptive between cake bites. I tell I love to hang out with her when school gets out, and she tells me to look her up. I do this about 3 weeks after graduation. I was very surprised that Ms. Librarian did not dress like a frump outside of school and had a rockin' body. It was kinda like discovering Clark Kent is Superman. I almost vapor-locked for the first 15 minutes, but recovered and was able to make a pass at her later in the evening. We had fun for a month, but she broke it off, for obvious reasons. About 8 years later, I ended up becoming a teacher at my old high school and worked with her. At this point she was married and had a kid. We never brought it up, and it has always been a good summer memory. Crushed hard on teacher my junior/senior year. Tried to persuade him many times to indulge my fantasy, but he wasn't a predator in any way and upheld his teaching position and marriage responsibilities, much to my dismay. 4 years later, we met in a bar. He was divorced and went home with me. We dated for a while, but the 17-year age difference was too much to navigate well. I was heartbroken when he said we were better as friends. Fast forward 25 years later. We live in the same town, but don't run into each other. I found out from a schoolmate that now he is at SHE. I was shocked because ID never had any indication that they were unhappy as a man and felt like I should have known for some reason. Felt guilty about not understanding some of their issues and wished I would have been more supportive. Haven't seen her, but if I do, I hope she lets me hug her and we can go get a coffee. Hope she is happy and doing well. I crushed on a teacher who I was pretty sure crushed on me too. To preface, I went to a bilingual school. There were English and Spanish students, and most of the classes were taught in English or Spanish versions. This teacher in question taught maths for the Spanish kids, so I never had any classes with her. She had a reputation for being crazy and having a really short fuse, and sure enough, any time I saw her she was usually shouting at someone. But every time I ran into her she was overly polite and courteous, even when I was being dumb or getting in the way. It went against her reputation, but I thought nothing of it. Then one day during Spanish class, we were all reading quietly and she just came in and pulled up a desk next to me and placed a children's storybook on my desk. And told me to read. I was utterly confused, but I did, and read this book expecting her to yell and berate me for my terrible broken Spanish, but she seemed to be enjoying it. I finished the book and she said good job and left. 2 years later, I graduated, and although I didn't intend to take maths, I started sitting in on her classes to help with my physics. The school I went to combined with a college. Same thing, she would yell at and berate other kids for making mistakes, but was incredibly patient when it came to me, even bordering on playful banter. Until one day I forgot a question on my homework, and she used it as an excuse to give me extra classes. She grabbed my timetable and started overriding random lunches and free periods I had. I should have put 2 and 2 together, but I was young and had no self-esteem and took it at face value and proceeded to freak out and melt down because it was the final straw amongst a lot of other shit going on at the time. I dropped out. I added her on Facebook a few years later. She always seemed really touched whenever I wished her happy birthday.